Welcome to Equal Inspired, the inclusive podcast, brought to you by Equal IT.
Welcome back, everybody. It's 2025. This means a new season of our Equal Inspired podcast. And let me tell you, what a season it is that we have in store for you this year. So many inspiring guests. But we are very excited to kick off our first episode of 2025 with the amazing Christopher Klint, who is the Director of Technology at Nenda, where he leads the charge in building scalable, reliable streaming solutions tailored for businesses. Originally from California, Christopher's professional journey includes roles such as engineering manager at Townis Tech, where he guided a team of developers, and he was a full-stack developer at Venture, where he contributed to building web and mobile applications. His experience covers a wide range of technologies, including Go, TypeScript, GraphQL, React Native, and cloud platforms. Outside of work, Christopher loves music and cooking. He has been playing the saxophone for many, many years and also does some DJing on the side.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
We are very happy to welcome you. Very special way to start off our 2025 podcast series. And what we would love to know in true Equal Inspired style, Christopher, is really how do you define your personal mission statement right now?
For myself, I'm all about building teams that are both highly performing, but also, highly inclusive. And that's kind of like something that really drives me. I want to have the best team, not just skill wise, but also, how you can bring together a lot of different perspectives and to have, this dialogue so that you can create this amazing product together. So very fluffy and very, top level, I guess you could say, but I would say that would probably be my mission statement as of right now.
Inclusion in a team is so important, and I'm curious, what does that actually mean to you?
It can mean a lot of different things for different people. I think for me, it's mostly about bringing these different perspectives to the table. I think it's very easy to sit back, kind of accept the status quo, especially if you have the same sort of like perspectives on the product. That can stifle innovation. So for me, it's mostly like looking into, okay, so how can we get a diverse perspectivity on this, product roadmap so that we can actually innovate and find these, different lenses that you can look at the product through. You don't want to stagnate in the industry, especially in the startup industry. Startups don't fail while writing code. They failed because they stopped writing. And then all of a sudden, you don't know which way to go and things like this. And if you don't have this dialogue, if you don't have this appealing product that also, because you looked at it with different lenses, you actually moved it into an even better space than it was before. So that's one part, the perspectives on it, but also the camaraderie of the team as well. I think that in terms of, well, if you look at the tech industry, there's a lot of men in the tech industry, especially if you look at developers and things like that. And I think it's important to be as inclusive as possible to make sure that you have this diverse workforce and you have this diverse team so that you do not like just go with the status quo, like, there's a lot of men, so we'll just go with the men kind of thing. And it's tough. It's hard to do, but I mean, it's important work.
Not focusing on inclusion, diversity, long term is going to impact your bottom line. The only thing that I find with some C-suite is they want to see things happen overnight. They want to see the impact. They want to see the financial gains from working on these things, inclusion, diversity. And the thing with inclusion is it doesn't happen overnight. You have to play the long game. You have to do the little things consistently to really create this sustainable change. And I'm just curious from your side, Christopher, in your journey, what have been some of the biggest challenges or obstacles when it comes to building inclusive teams?
One big obstacle has definitely been to finding this talent because, as you mentioned, it's a long-term game, of course, but it's also like where to look and also how to be attractive as a company for this talent. And there's ways to try and mitigate this challenge as well. One of those, going out to events, for example, like Women in Tech, getting involved, the whole organization in getting the brand out there. And that's something that's difficult also for a startup. I mean, you have limited resources, of course, but you do the small things. You interact, you network, you say, okay, so we want to be an inclusive workforce. We want to make sure that we have one of the best teams possible. This is why that we're an attractive workplace, and things like this. But it is definitely a challenge to find this talent. I think another challenge is maybe a little bit of, okay, so how do we actually make sure during the recruitment process that we are unbiased, that we're making sure that we're going from a skills-based, process-oriented recruitment instead of gut feeling. It's, I mean, and it's something that, previous companies that I worked with, of course, that you get into this situation of like, oh, this person that I'm interviewing on the side of the table, we're like the same person. And it's so easy to get into this cycle of, okay, I'm just confirming my own personality pretty much. And this is a good gut feeling. But kind of challenging yourself and saying, okay, so let's make sure that we're, going process oriented in the recruitment process and not just going on gut feeling, hunches and stuff like that.
Community is a huge, huge thing. It makes such a difference. It's a great way to put yourself out there, to attract folks who maybe aren't on social platforms as well, like LinkedIn and things like that. I know that you attended a event, Women in Tech Regatta. Tell me a bit about your experience attending a Woman in Tech event as a man.
First and foremost, it's really important to attend, especially as a man, these kind of events, because also you hear different perspectives and you hear it first of all, in a forum that's a safe space. Is something that you can actually dive into these different topics. One of the topics that I discussed on the panel, for example, was feedback, how to give feedback, how to receive feedback, and all the things around that as well. So doing this panel and actually feeling the questions from the participants as well, it was super interesting and super insightful to see, okay, so what are the different challenges that they are facing and how can I make sure, take these lessons, make sure that in my teams, but also in networking in the future or even in future teams, how can I make sure that how I give feedback or how I receive feedback is something that is actually something positive for the team and not something that, okay, it's a knee-jerk reaction or things like this. Because, I mean, culture is super important. And so going back to the event, I think it was very eye-opening. It was very excellent to hear the different perspectives there. I think it's a good opportunity for these events as well to have, men in the room as well, this sense of allyship, that's, we're in this together and it's not like us versus them. Because as soon as you start with that sort of like thinking and talking and stuff like that, then progress stints a little bit. So you kind of need to get everyone on board. And I think it was good to be a part of that event. And I really appreciated that I was even asked to be a part of the panel.
That's a wonderful thing that you was asked and you have that experience and you can share that with others, because I feel like there's still a big stigma around being a guy and going to an event like this, that you're taking up space, this isn't a room for you. What I want to do is really work to break that down, because like you say, it's so important that there are men in the room hearing these challenges, learning, thinking of new ways to support other folks from underrepresented communities. And only by being in these rooms, hearing the lived experiences, is when people are going to be able to come away with a toolkit to actually take action. And thinking about that, what kind of words of reassurance or motivation can you share to other men out there who are holding themselves back from going to something like this because of that kind of fear of taking up a space?
My words of encouragement will probably say, start small. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to talk in an event. You don't have to be in the center of attention or things like that. I'm American, so that's kind of like a natural thing. we, we're loud. We take up a lot of space and stuff like that. But it's totally fine to just be at the event, to just, come as a guest, come to the after work. There's a lot of different opportunities to come to these events and to hear these discussions. But I would say also just being curious. That's something that's also very positive, because that's how you start the conversation. That's how you get these new experiences, new perspectives, and being a good listener and saying, oh, I never thought of it like that. Or, oh, this process could actually be improved. And that's a really good perspective. So I think starting small, working with your fellow coworkers on improving processes or improving how you do things as a team, I think that that's definitely something that anyone can do. And hopefully they have a team and a boss that they feel like they can come with this feedback as well. Um, but I would say start small.
I feel that it's really powerful as well to own what you do and what you don't know, and to not be afraid to be a little bit more vulnerable in these kind of environments, and actually say to somebody that, hey, I'm really new on the allyship journey. This is why I care about it. This is an experience that I guess, sparked this within me to want to make a change. So I'm learning, bear with me, but if you have some time, I'd love to ask some questions, or I'd love to learn more about your story. Like you say, be curious, have an open mind, but actually don't be afraid to own those things as well. And I love what you say about starting small. Something that I've seen work really well too, again, in that like concept of taking up somebody else's space, is maybe if you want to go to one of these events, invite one of your colleagues from an underrepresented community to come along with you as well. So you're kind of going together and you're inviting somebody else. You're not taking up a space, you're giving someone else an opportunity.
But that's really good. And it's this sense of vulnerability. This is something that it's really important to have. I mean, also in this context, but like in the team as well. Like, you want to have trust in the team, and the only real way to build that trust is to be vulnerable. So, that's going to help in a lot of different areas, but I think primarily it's good for allyship and also for inclusion.
But vulnerability can be really scary for some people. And I think that, there's that idea that if you're vulnerable, you're weak, which is totally not true. That's so outdated. But unfortunately, that mindset does still exist. So, Christopher, as a leader, what are some ways that you try to showcase vulnerability or come into your vulnerability a little bit more?
No, definitely. It's all about this difference between growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So you were mentioning previously, like, oh, it's a sign of weakness, or I'm not strong, or I'm not smart, or things like that. All things that are related to a fixed mindset. And then, so what I try to do as a leader to make sure that the whole team, that we go towards this like growth mindset, is it's a lot of, we as a team, we succeed together. But if it's something that it involves like, mistakes or failure, then I make sure that I try to take it on as like I'm the one responsible, like at a early point. So if I make mistakes, I'm owning up to them immediately, saying, oh, yep, I screwed this up. That was my bad. Let's see how we can move on from this. Because I feel like showing that I am not perfect, it's something that it's subconscious also. I'm not standing up and saying that like, oh, I'm so vulnerable now because now I made a mistake, right? It's these things that are, I don't know, these signals that we take as we're working together, and it's all subconscious level that it's like, oh, okay, it's fine to make mistakes and it's okay to learn from them, because that's what's the most important thing, not the fact that we are perfect from the get-go, because we're never going to be, right? And I think startups and software companies, that's something that we know all about. Agile, you don't want to do this waterfall project, do it for 6 months and then do a release, because you're already too late. You didn't get any feedback from the beginning if you would have been releasing every 2 weeks or something like that. So similar mindset here. Be vulnerable, say, yep, screw that one up, but you know what? I learned this. And this is actually a much better solution. This is what we can do going forward. I also want to try and encourage that the team owns kind of a little bit of their personal development. What I mean by this is not that like, oh, I lead them out to dry and say, oh, are you getting no help from me? You need to do it yourself. But what I mean by that is like, okay, encourage them. What areas, for example, of the code base do you want to own? What areas do you feel like, oh, I want to do more of this next year, for example, the New Year's resolutions, the ones that we never do, right? But like, what goals are we setting for ourselves? What's important to us? and being clear on this feedback of like, okay, you know what? I want to do this. Okay, great. How can we do this together? How can I support you in the best way? So it is it's not a one size fits all, absolutely not. But I would feel that you need to have the conversation and it needs to be open. And I think that you really need to lead as a role model for it to be something that is the red thread through the team, but even through the organization as well.
Communication is like essential. Everything that you've said there, the theme is all around communication, not acting on assumptions. And I say this a lot, but assumptions are dangerous. So being curious, asking the questions, asking your team what they need from you, not just assuming. And then you can come up with a really tailored game plan that's going to help someone feel like they have a voice, feel like they're seen, feel included. And of course, then it's the taking action that really counts on that. Just on the topic of feedback, because I know that that's what you was on the panel for at Women in Tech Regatta, and you spoke a little bit about the one-on-ones and how you tried to uncover how you can better support someone. Tell me a bit about what were some of your reflections from the panel discussion and things that you learned from hearing those diverse perspectives.
There was a lot of good insights. One of those that comes straight to mind is asking when is a good time to give feedback. I guess from my perspective, I'm come from a practice of like, okay, I want to give direct feedback like immediately, either afterwards, like a presentation or during, and and to understanding that like, okay, maybe the person on the receiving end, they're not at a receptive like moment to actually receive this feedback. They've been working on this presentation all day. It's been very tough. They have a lot of side things going on. They're very stressed out. And actually much better tomorrow to have this feedback, to have this follow-up, this retrospective. In asking this question, is it okay if I give you some feedback right now? Like just a super simple question, but all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, yes, I'm going to give feedback. Do I feel, you kind of do this like mental check-in of like, oh yeah, I think that's fine. And then you go through the feedback instead of like, let's work on this together. So that's one of the things that was very illuminating. And then also how to give feedback. Everybody's different. You should give feedback in a way so that the receiver is listening mostly. And that's something that, every leader is going to have a different perspective on because they know their fellow coworkers the best in the team. But for example, some people prefer direct feedback. Some people prefer like go straight to the point. You don't have to fluff it. It's fine. Like I this is how it motivates me. And some other people are more like, okay, you do the sandwich method. You start with a positive, you have a constructive, and then you end with a positive. So then everything feels good afterwards. So people are very much different. And I think that asking right out the bat, like, how do you want to receive feedback? Then you can actually give the feedback in the best way for this person. And you can have that growth and see them progress even better. Also, another third thing that I think was very important to pick up is no feedback is small feedback, especially when it comes to positive feedback. Some people hold the positive feedback to themselves or even discuss it with others, like, that presentation was so good, or that project, that release was really good. They did a great job on this coding area, but then they don't give it to the actual person. So I think it's very important to give a pat on the back or a high five or a fist bump or whatever you have to do and just give that positive feedback and say, that was really good that you did. They might not even think of it as anything, but like you just gave them re-encouraging feedback. So now this is a behavior that has been affirmed or whatever. I'm not a behavioral scientist. I know I'm saying a lot of big words, but it's like it's a behavior that's been confirmed that like this is positive. People like this. I'm going to continue doing this. And this is kind of like how easy pretty much it is to like, make sure that we're not losing sight of the things we should continue doing as well. It's very easy to look at the things that we should change, but what are the things that we should never change? That's also important to remember.
Wow, I'm gutted that I wasn't there, to be honest, Christopher, because it sounds like it was a really amazing, enriching discussion. But I feel like I've kind of half been there with what you've just shared. So thank you. It's really powerful. And again, what could be small feedback, like you say, in your mind for somebody as well, could make their day, could make their week. They needed to get that feedback to keep them going. You never know what's going on behind closed doors for someone. And your positive words of affirmation could really make a difference positively on their mood, if it's something that they've done well.
One easy thing that anyone can do, start out a one-to-one, start it out with positive feedback. Like just just have that as a practice and have that as a, you know what, I just want to give good feedback to you. This, I've really been noticing this. This has been really doing really well. And you should really receive this positive feedback that I have. And that's how you start the one-to-one. All of a sudden, like you're on a different wavelength in comparison to like how you would be talking if it was just like, how are you? How are you? Yes. Do you have anything to discuss? No, not this time. Blah, blah, blah. It's a completely different level you're working with.
Inclusion is something that we've been speaking about a lot. And where did this come from for you, Christopher, in terms of the moment that you really felt that importance to make sure that you were building inclusive teams?
Whether it's being listened to this podcast or if it's being watched, I am a mixed child, I guess you could say. So my dad, he's from Denmark, and my mom, she's from US. I'm half black, half white, grew up mixed, and it was, I mean, not to go into a lot of detail about my childhood, I think I had a very great childhood. I'm not saying that. I don't have any childhood trauma, thank the Lord, but it's been a little bit tough to identify, okay, so where do I belong a little bit? Both in being a mixed child, but also when I was 18, I moved over to Sweden. That's another different culture shock, and also like find my place here and things like that. And just this sense of belonging is so important because when you identify or when you feel like you belong somewhere, either in a team or in a cause or any sort of like identity kind of like that, it's kind of something that really you get another sense of safety from it. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but it's that's kind of like how I've experienced it in my journey, at least. And then when I've been, yeah, studying here and then my journey with startups and things like that, it really noticed as well, like if you want to build like these amazing high performing teams, culture comes first. It's not something that's an afterthought, really. It's something that needs to be prioritized from day one. Um, and it's something that, in terms of culture, is also also not something that can be forced top down. It's a great idea when you have this like project that you're like, oh, everyone's gonna go through this like boot camp plan or whatever, and now we're all gonna be aligned. It's like, it's not like culture isn't the vision. Culture is kind of like the small daily habits that you do together, I think, at least. Connecting that to the sense of belonging, when you have a culture where you have this like psychological safety in the team, but also like with yourself of like, oh, what I'm contributing to is appreciated, I'm seen, I'm heard. Some of the things that you were talking about, Ellie, were, it's easy to forget because you're working towards a bottom line or you're working towards, a sprint release or something like that. But that's actually the things that should be prioritized and that comes first, because you can power through as many sprints or as many months as you think that you can. But at the end of the day, if you're not seen or heard, you're going to want to move on to somewhere else. And this turnover of talent, it's expensive. It's not something that anybody wants to deal with pretty much, because all of this knowledge that walks out the building. But I think at the end of the day, for me, what becomes most important is to create a team where we really are just like working together. We're high performing, but we have fun together because we are so high performing. And that's everyone's opinion is heard and seen, and their contributions matter. So yeah, tied it a little bit to my background a little bit, but I think that that's for me, I think why it resonates so much.
Thank you for sharing that, Christopher, your journey and your why this is so important. And belonging, it's a feeling internally, right? Somebody can't tell you that you belong. A leader can't tell the team that they belong. You need to feel it internally. And something that I like to ask, because it is such a personal feeling, is when you think about the moments where you felt you most belonged. I know you spoke a little bit about the things you ensure for your team, but just thinking about your own experiences, what were the actions, what were the behaviors that you feel sparked that sense of belonging?
One of the things that comes to mind in the terms of like, okay, how I felt that I actually belonged, sense of ownership. And this is not as a leader per se, aspects of the code, for example, knowing that, okay, Chris, he's worked on the mobile app. He's the go-to guy. He has the mandate, I guess you could say, to actually make changes and to like provide suggestions. And this provides a sense of empowerment, I guess, from myself, speaking from a personal perspective of like, oh yeah, I can do this. I can improve this. I can make this better because I've been given that mandate. I've been given that encouragement. So that's one aspect of it, like ownership, and even like in small areas or even like just ownership of processes. I would also say another perspective is like, of course, feeling heard from my leader or my boss or something like that, being able to have great conversations and discussions and not being afraid to provide feedback, both to provide feedback, but also to receive feedback. And that's something that, personally I've struggled with also in my journey of like, okay, so how can I be myself, but also give this feedback? That's something that I've also had to, and I continue to make sure that I practice so that I don't get back into how it was before with, and being shy, honestly, because it's very easy to go into your own like close off a little bit and just be like, okay, shy, yes, focusing on work, that's it, and then go home and feeling a little bit more like a number instead of like a person contributing on the team. So those two things I think is most important to me: ownership, giving responsibility, and that leads to being seen and heard, but also like having a good relationship with your leader and your boss, because it's two ways as well. It's hard for a leader to do all of the work, and it's hard for the other person to do all of the work. It has to be a two-way street.
And that's like with everything: diversity, inclusion, equity, equality. It's a two-way. We all have to be working together. We all have to be communicating, working in unity. But thank you again, Christopher, for sharing your personal experiences. And there's some great gems that our audience can take on board and think about how can they integrate that into their day-to-day to help others feel that sense of belonging. And of course, belonging is something different for everyone, but I think it's important to really give space and give thought to the things that you've shared.
Yeah, of course.
You mentioned skills-based recruitment earlier on, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, about building an inclusive hiring process, because the market right now is so competitive, and now more than ever, it's so important to be inclusive, but also to humanize the process as much as you can. We're hearing far too often of individuals being ghosted, investing hours of their time into processes and genuinely never hearing anything back. And it's really sad because that has such a domino effect on somebody's potential confidence, self worth, all of these things. So, I want to hear from you, Christopher, some of the ways that you strive to build a more inclusive, enjoyable hiring process.
I think it all starts with the actual like advertisement of the job ad. I mean, there's I think studies done, and there's then A/B comparisons of like, okay, so how do men apply to jobs? How do women apply to jobs? And also like, what are the characteristics of a job ad? What should be there and what should not be there to encourage the actual like applications to come in from a diverse pool of candidates instead of just tailoring to one side. So I think it starts with the job ad. I know that in terms of understanding, in terms of knowledge there, I'm definitely not the best. I'm not an expert there, but I do know that there are biases. I know that I am biased myself. So that's something that I try to, okay, kind of reloop in my head. Is this something that's going to work? Is this something that, or trying different things to encourage this diverse pool of candidates? So that's one thing, the job ad. I would also say that during the recruitment as well, to make, and then it makes it easier for yourself as well if you have you standardize your questions, but you also leave room for personality, but also for character to shine. So it's not like too strict. It's always good to, you have a baseline, you know exactly what you're going to present, both from your side and the company, but also like what they're looking for. You want to also learn more about the candidate, of course. So good to have standardized questions, be prepared before. Please at least look at the LinkedIn or the CV before, with your own questions, your own interests as well about what you find interesting about the candidates. Which in my head, it's kind of like common sense, but not everyone does that.
That's the thing, right? Sometimes it does feel so obvious. And that's also with building an inclusive culture process, just being inclusive. It can feel so obvious, but it's not done enough. As a hiring manager, what are some ways, and of course, everyone's opinion is different, but what are some ways that individuals can stand out in this crowded job market?
I mean, this is a very good time question because also we have generative AI, and that's something that we're seeing all over when it comes to like applications. There has been cases that I've reviewed where it's been completely AI generated, and we knew that off the bat. And yeah, so what I will say though is that I will say that AI is a tool. I will say that AI is there to help you shine. So you still need to have your personality. You still need to have who you are in the job application, either if that's in the CV or the cover letter, if that's required for the role. But I would say that how to stand out, I'm going to go from my perspective because I know that everyone has a different side of this. From my perspective, I think that years of experience is in going strictly on that says nothing. And I view this from a startup mentality. 3 years in a startup versus 3 years at large corporation. The 3 years of things that you'll be doing is completely different. So what's most important to me is, okay, of course you want to make sure that you touch the stack. For example, if there's a stack in the job application, Node.js or something like this, or TypeScript or Postgres or things like that. So you want to make sure, okay, you have sort of touch these technologies, or at least they're interesting to you, and there's a reason why you're making the change, because that's a question that's going to come up, especially if you don't have that experience. So that's the first thing, of course. But once you covered that, then I would say what's a surefire way to stick out from other candidates is actually the questions that the candidate asks. I've also been in a lot of interviews where you go through the presentation, you ask your question to the candidate, and then you leave. The other half of the interview is open for the candidate to ask questions, and they don't want to ask anything. They're like, "Oh no, I don't wonder anything." That's a little bit of a red flag because because it's like, okay, but you don't have any information. You just have what I've said. Like, what's important to you? What are you wondering about? Like, is there anything that doesn't make sense? There's a lot of things that I've mentioned that would be of interest. And that can come off a little bit, lacking of interest, lacking of, okay, is this person going to just accept what I say and not come with own ideas? And we have discussion back and forth and things like that. Because on my team, I'm not looking for yes people. I'm looking for, people to take ownership and to contribute and to collaborate. So communication is super important, and that comes through when you don't have your own questions. So come prepared with your own questions, or even just like ask during the interview of like, that sounds interesting. Could you please elaborate more or something like that? That ticks off boxes, definitely. And yeah, going more onto that category, soft skills. That is something that will shine through the application, both in like communication, how you communicate, asking questions, be on time to the interview, like these normal things that are easy to forget, but it's like they allow you to shine kind of. And also when it's some processes have cases, some don't, depending on like what the role is and things like this. But if there is a case, if there's any sort of uncertainty, reach out. And I would really highly encourage that for everyone. If there's an uncertainty in the case, you get a document and it says you need to do this and that, and it should take max 4 hours. And you're thinking of a solution that's going to take at least a day or 12 hours. And you're like, nothing's really matching up. Is it because they want me to scope out this part? Blah, blah, blah. Coming with those questions, it's not something that's going to like hurt you. It's actually going to elevate you, because then you can provide an even better case and you're also showing your communication like, okay, this is unclear. And this is exactly what's going to happen when you get requirements from the product team or you're given a project like, oh, so this is the project. And you're just like, wait, what? This doesn't make any sense. And if you don't ask those questions in the beginning, then we're going to get to the results in a way like more complicated way than we were in the beginning. So that shows that kind of intuitiveness and that communication. Yeah. So what's the saying? Location, location, location. I would say communication, communication, communication. That's how you stand out.
Communication, communication, communication. We need to get that on a poster. We need to get that on like a t-shirt or something because it's so important. And I'm so pleased that you've mentioned about asking if you're unsure because again, I feel that some people feel fear that in doing that, they're going to come across as not the right individual for the role. They're going to be judged for the wrong reasons or be seen as incompetent. But no, getting clarification is going to make the difference for you and help you to do better work and in turn perform better. So don't fear that. Just do it. Be afraid if you are, but do it anyway because it's only going to help your case. You said about asking questions in an interview, if you can. And I'm just wondering if you remember any standout questions that like really left you like, wow, that was a really great question or kind of caught you off guard a little bit.
There's a couple I can probably think of. I think one that comes to mind off the bat is probably like, so what don't you like about your current role or like your current position here at this company? And that's a little bit of an off one. And you would think like, oh, you want to keep things positive. You want to focus on like the good and all this stuff. And you can probably word it a bit better than I did, of course. But I think that you really start thinking like, because all companies, you have your good and bad. So like you kind of want to get the air clean a little bit, be a little bit transparent and see like, okay, so what what bugs you? Like what gets on your nerves and stuff like that? And with the current company or the current process or things like that. What is something that really grinds your gears? And once you start talking about that and in getting that off your chest, all of a sudden it's like you've almost, I don't know, you shared something, you had a connection with the other person in a different way compared to like, oh, so what's your most favorite thing about the company? And yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, I don't know, it's like on a deeper level because you got to vent a little bit about like, oh, this process, it's so slow, we need to improve it, and yada yada yada. But I think that also provides an opportunity for the candidate to see how do we identify issues? Because there are issues that we need to work on, but like, are we working on them now? Is it something that we know we don't have time for? But this role, this is why we're recruiting this, because this is an issue. You also have this moment of total transparency where the guards come down on both sides a little bit about like, oh, okay, we got to vent a little bit. We got to have this moment and share that moment. So I think that's a one really good example. I think another one that I've also received has been, what's the current project you're working on? Or like, what if I were to start tomorrow? What would I be doing? Like just to take me through like an average work day, an average work week. What's the most high priority project? And related to that, what is expected of me the first week, the first month, the first year? These progression milestones of like, what is the expectations? And that's also diving a bit more into transparency. Because I mean, not everything's written on the job ad. There's some things that are assumed, and there's some different interpretations of it as well. One that's really good is like, how are you as a leader? What is your communication style? Diving a bit more into, especially if you're the closest leader, maybe this isn't in for all the interviews. Maybe there's different interviews with different people, but definitely to your closest leader. What's your communication style? How do you lead? How do you want feedback? You can start with these questions in the early stages of the recruitment process. That's just going to shine even more about like, okay, they're very like interested in myself, but also like if we're a good match, because that's also important. It's not just, you don't work in silos. We work as a team. So how is the team? How is that culture? How is the leader? That's where the culture comes from.
Yeah, for our audience, I'm telling you now, add this to your list. Add this to your like non-negotiable list of questions to ask when you're going into interviews because it is you interviewing them as you getting interviewed. And that's the important thing that you need to remember. Great questions, Christopher. Thank you for sharing. I have to say, it's been amazing to welcome you for our first Equal Inspired podcast episode of 2025. And I'd love to wrap things up by just asking, because I know that music is a huge passion of yours. So I want to know, if you could duet with any artist, musician, who would it be?
That's a really good question. So I like my. It depends on how I want to answer this, because I feel like there's like one song that I can't get out of my head, and it's Espresso by Sabrina Carpenter. And like, it's like kind of a guilty pleasure, kind of embarrassing to admit, but like that song has been on my head constantly since it's been released. And I'm like, I just want to like be on stage for like that song and then just like have a great time and then like leave. I don't have to do the whole concert, but I just want to do like that song. And like, it would be so cool to like remix it. I know that what's his name? Mark Ronson, I think, the one that he did Uptown Funk with Bruno Mars, for those who know. But he did a remix on it. It was a great remix. It would be awesome to do a remix on that one. But yeah, it has to be her. I'm sorry, I can't get that song out of my head. It's addicting.
Hey, Judgment Free Zone, Christopher. That song literally is a banger. It's a great song. Judgment Free Zone. So Judgment Free Zone here. I love that. But thank you so much again, Christopher. It's been so wonderful.
No, I really appreciate it. And yeah, glad I could give some insights. It was a really great discussion. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode, and we hope you're feeling inspired. If you are, please feel free to like, share, subscribe, and join us on our mission to create a diverse, inclusive, and equitable universe. This podcast is brought to you by Equal IT, a mission-driven business working to diversify tech teams through refined talent acquisition, complemented by diversity and inclusion consulting. As an Azure Heroes inclusive leader, we aim for teams to cultivate a strong sense of belonging and equity. Find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. We welcome your feedback, questions, and would love to hear from you. Join us next time on Equal Inspired.